Good evening, everyone. This is Nigel Harniman from CloudBees. Welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm hoping that you can all see the screen and the PowerPoint okay. If not, please let us know via the chat screen. So I'm going to spend about 60 minutes tonight discussing Jenkins workflow and how it can facilitate continuous delivery. So first off, a quick message about our partners, eSynergy Solutions, who are hosting this evening's event. eSynergy Solutions specialise in open source and cloud resourcing, and they have a dedicated team focusing on placing contractors and permanent resource across a number of areas, including cloud, big data, Internet of Things, development and architecture, DevOps, and cybersecurity, and they can help you identify digital transformation leaders. eSynergy Solutions run a lot of community events and training sessions and meetups to help network and share ideas and upskill. They partner with some of the most innovative open source organizations, which allows them to offer their clients a blended model of qualified associates who have been built up through these communities. So a quick word on some house rules before we get going on the webinar. Please ask questions as we go via the chat box. We have Jesse Glick, who is the co-author of the Jenkins workflow plugin online, and he will attempt to answer questions as we go via chat. At the end of the presentation, we'll leave some time for further questions and answers, and we'll recap on some of the questions that have been asked during the webinar. The presentation, recording and slides will be made available online, and eSynergy will distribute the links afterwards. So before we get cracking, so about me, my name is Nigel Harniman. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect at CloudBees, and my role is to help our customers understand how Jenkins Enterprise and Jenkins Operations Center can help them solve their goals. I've been in engineering for over 20 years and have performed various Java development and architecture roles, including a stint as build engineer and as a lead DevOps. And I came to CloudBees from Sky, which is the UK broadcaster, where I had responsibility for the online video platform. And as part of my time there, I designed and built an online platform for sales and service using infrastructure as code principles. And that was DevOps before it was really called that. And in that particular project, we had QAs deploy many times a day via self-service mechanisms with database redeployment and upgrades and flexible mocking options. And we were deploying to prod on a weekly basis with full infrastructure rebuild. So hopefully I can bring some of that to this presentation tonight and help you build your continuous delivery pipelines. So in terms of who we've got on the line, I'm assuming that we'll have a broad selection of people. So some of you may have experience in development, some of you may be in operations. I guess a number of you may be using Jenkins, and some of you this might be new. And some of you will probably be doing continuous integration, and hopefully a number of you are looking to do continuous deployment, which is the reason for your interest tonight. And some of you may even have gone as far as actually contributing to Jenkins core code or developing plugins. So who knows about how CloudBees relates to Jenkins? So I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about that. So our CTO is actually the creator of Jenkins, which is Kazuki Kawaguchi, and we create enterprise solutions around Jenkins. So tonight's agenda, I'm going to discuss a little bit about Jenkins and CloudBees. We'll briefly review what continuous delivery is all about and share the definition with you to make sure everyone's on the same page. And we will talk about how Jenkins works with continuous delivery and how it integrates within a continuous delivery process. We'll talk about a little bit about how continuous delivery was done before workflows was around, and then we're going to look in detail at the workflow engine and the reasons why it was created and how it works. And I've got a demo to show you on that. We'll then recap on some of the workflow syntax, and then right at the end I'll look to the future and say where workflow is going to go and some of the things that are just coming out. So Jenkins is the #1 continuous integration and continuous deployment server. It's an open source project, it's been around for over 10 years now. It's got a very big and active community. It has an open extensible plugin architecture, which is great for orchestrating the delivery pipeline because you may have to integrate to multiple technologies. So we've got over 1,000 plugins today, and this is growing at the rate of about 2 per week. And as you saw with our recent Jenkins 100K day, we've now got over 100,000 active installs. In reality, it might be more than that because we can't always see what's going on behind firewalls. And just to give some context to that, we've seen a yearly growth of 34% in installs and a 64% increase in community plugin downloads. So what do people use Jenkins for? And these are the figures that have come prior to the launch of Workflow, so we think this is going to change a bit in the coming year. Historically, people have been very large at using it for build and for doing testing. But as you can see further down, there's been a significant number of people using it for release and for deployment. We think that's going to grow as people move into doing continuous delivery. So a little bit about CloudBees. Who are we? Well, we are the premier provider of Jenkins continuous integration services and support. So what do we do with Jenkins? Well, we optimize it for the enterprise. So we have a product called Jenkins Operations Center, which is like a master of masters. We provide support for the open source variant, and we have a series of enterprise class plugins which address the requirements of larger or more advanced customers. Our engineers also commit code and support the community, and Workflow is a great example of this, as is Folders, because we've developed those and given those back as open source plugins. And we also provide Jenkins training and consulting, and we're also the people behind the Jenkins user conferences and the newsletters that you will see. So what makes CloudBees special? Well, Kazuki Kawaguchi is the Jenkins creator, and he's actually the CTO of CloudBees. He's part of our team. We have a large number of people that contribute to the Jenkins community that actually work now for CloudBees. So Jesse, who's on the line, and people like Stephen Connolly, they're kind of co-authors of many of the plugins, and they're now part of CloudBees. And we provide enterprise class CI. We understand how enterprise development teams work, and more importantly, we actually maintain one of the largest Jenkins installations worldwide, so we understand how to make it scale. And we can support you both on-premise and in the cloud. So a look at our team. We were founded by Sasha Laburi, who came from JBoss and then on through Red Hat. Kazuki Kawaguchi is our CTO, and then we've got a very strong team membership based on people with sound engineering through Sun and Oracle and other large companies. And as I noted earlier, we have Jesse and Stephen and Ryan as key architects within our team. So what are the CloudBees solutions? Well, we have the ability to run on-premise with Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees and Jenkins Operations Center by CloudBees. And we can support you in the cloud with our Dev at Cloud service. And if you so wish, we can also run in a hybrid mode where you can have on-premise executors and access to your on-premise systems and resources. So a quick word about CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise. We supply professional support for open source. We also have plugins that support high availability so that you can keep your service up. We can run in a clustered environment with an active passive configuration. We have plugins that support large installations such as backups and consolidated build views, custom update centers for adding your plugins, folders for organizing your jobs, and other such things like templates which make it easier to scale up. We also provide plugins around security, so role-based access control and secure copy of artifacts between jobs and between masters. And we also help you optimize for a large environment. So we have a plugin that changes the slave allocation strategy to make more effective use of your resources. We have a fast archiver for your jar files. And such things. And we also have a plugin that enables you to overcome some of the blocking I/O issues with your slave communication through a non-blocking I/O architecture. And then more importantly, which is what this presentation is all about, we support continuous delivery through the workflow and the workflow stage view and the checkpoints plugins. CloudBees Jenkins Operations Center sits above that and allows you to operate at scale. You can do things like share your slaves between masters to get higher efficiency of resources, and you provide centralized ops and management. We also help you achieve security compliance by basically setting up the security configuration in a central place and cascading it to all of the masters. And we also enable you to host effectively an app store for plugins, so you can publish controlled versions of the plugins to your organization's Jenkins estate, essentially manage the updates through cluster operations. And all of that integrates nicely and sits on top of the Jenkins Enterprise. We also have the Dev at Cloud service, and this allows you to not worry about infrastructure and run your builds within our environment in the cloud. And as you'd expect, sitting on top of an open source product, our company also allows us to provide Jenkins certified training. We can provide consulting on how to use Jenkins, and we also supply the newsletters and run the Jenkins user conferences. And for those of you that might be interested, we have a number of user conferences and CD summits coming up in Washington, London and San Francisco. These are two-day events, and the user conference will really be focusing on Jenkins, but the CD Summit is everything around continuous delivery. You don't need to be a Jenkins aficionado to come to the CD Summit and get value out of it. So plan now, and hopefully we will see you at one of those events. So let's crack on with talking about continuous delivery. So hopefully a number of you will have seen this, the book. It's the seminal text by Jez Humble and David Farley. I'd highly recommend reading it if you're thinking about moving into continuous delivery. It's got some great ideas, and these guys have really been down in the trenches and doing it. And so they bring some of their tips and techniques to that. But one of the key things is to recap on the definition. So continuous delivery is about the reliable software releases through build, test, and deployment automation. And the main difference between CI and CD is the definition of done. Continuous delivery moves the definition of done, so beyond just unit tests, to the application is shippable to production, which means that all tests are passed, including functional, performance, security, operations, etc., etc. And that's really the main difference. Some people may argue that done means it's shipped to production, but the pragmatist will probably turn around and say it's ready to ship. The last thing you have to do is press the button and make it go live. So to recap, continuous integration would typically have had a number of steps in it, which would have been checking out from your source code control, running your compile, running your unit tests, possibly running some static code coverage or analysis tests using Sonar or one of those products, and then delivering an artifact into a repository. And this is kind of what we've been doing for CI for probably the last 12 years. And it's very valuable. It helps with the initial phases of the life cycle. But as we move into continuous delivery, we start to add more steps onto the end of this. We now want to improve upon it, and we want to go further. So we keep the first part of the life cycle to storing the binaries in Artifactory or Nexus or whatever you're using. And actually, in some instances, I just used a file system under Apache to put my binaries. It doesn't have to be anything that smart. But what we want to do now is we want to do some automated end-to-end tests, such as functional with Fitness or Selenium or Cucumber. And there's value in performing these tests before asking the QA team to do manual acceptance testing or validation on the application. Some organizations may actually go as far as automating their performance tests. They may want to do kind of trending analysis or absolute performance tests before they actually say the thing's ready to go. And in doing all of that, you may find that you've actually got to administer your whole environment. So you need to not only deploy the application, but you need to manage the version of your database, perhaps reload it with some test data, upgrade the schema, and then you need to run your tests, and then you need to collect the results. And these are very complex steps. But basically, if you put automation around this, you can optimize the delivery, and you can make sure that your QAs are getting a quality product to do their final manual testing on. And then what we might do is say, okay, when the QAs have actually said, I'm done, we need to cut the release. So we need to tag it, push it to a final production release point or a production artifactory, and then we need to validate the deployment automation through perhaps a pre-prod environment or a staging environment. So really we're testing everything. It's not just the code, but it's the whole process for how we get this into a running environment and into production. And this is really what continuous delivery is recommending that we do. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. So here's a sample continuous delivery pipeline, and this is the one I'm going to use to do the demonstration with. using Jenkins workflow. So I've got a standard Java Tomcat application, which is the Spring Pet Clinic. I'm guessing a number of you have seen this and know of it. It's a standard demo application by the Spring Framework. It's a Java Maven application, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile it, run some unit tests, and then in parallel I'm going to do several things. So I'm going to do my performance testing with JMeter in parallel to doing some code analysis. So when this is successful, I then want to deploy to my UAT environment and have people via human interaction confirm that it's been proven and it's okay, and then we can proceed on. Then I'm going to have the ops people verify it, and then it's going to be ready to ship to production. And what we're going to see is that Jenkins can join all the dots between these many steps. We'll integrate with source code repository to detect changes, perform the build, compilation, unit tests, store the binaries, run the sonar analysis, and then we're going to orchestrate the deployment across all of those environments and ready to go to prod. So really Jenkins is connecting all the dots and defining the process. It's the hub of all of this. It's taken on the role as the orchestrator of the whole process, and it's connecting all the teams and all the pieces together. So really, continuous delivery pipeline is a workflow. Sometimes as a developer we are reluctant to use workflow technologies and we prefer to hard code things using Java or scripting languages. But really we can say that this whole pipeline is a workflow. Because of that, we need more than a simple sequence of steps hard-coded in a script. So what do we need? Well, pipelines are complex. They may have multiple stages, like your performance testing, like your compile or your commit stage, like your user acceptance testing. We need to have non-sequential logic. So we may want to do things in parallel, we may want to loop around things, we may want to fork and not actually come back, or we may want to do forks and joins. And we may want to run those on separate nodes because they're either the most appropriate node, or by running in parallel we want to do things faster, so we need more resources available to us. Workflows need to be long running. If you start to think about running a 4-hour soak test or a 4-hour regression suite, the last thing you want to happen is a wobble in the infrastructure, meaning a server reboots or a network connection gets dropped and reconnected, and then your workflow crashes. You need it to survive that sort of interruption. You also want to interact with humans. While some companies may be quite happy to go from commit to running in live with no human intervention, a lot of companies are going to want to put controls around that. You may have a limited number of test environments, so you may want a human decision to say, okay, we need to run that on the blue environment or the green environment and have a choice input. You may also want to make sure that you don't go to production unless somebody has approved it and has got a change control number and you've been through your change board and you're ready to go. So all of those require human input. You also may find that you want your builds to be restartable. So if you're halfway through the workflow and you have an environment wobble, you may not want to start from the top and rerun everything. You may want to just run from a particular checkpoint and continue downstream where you were. And over all of that, you're going to end up with some quite complicated and quite complex steps in your workflows, and you want those to be reusable. So your deployment should be similar across all of your environments. And then some of your jobs may be very similar in themselves. How you build and deploy Java applications may be quite repeatable. So you want to build up a library of reusable definitions that you can just draw upon. You need to implement the same principles as you do in good coding, like dry, don't repeat yourself. And over all of that, we need the scripts to be comprehensible so you can look in one place and understand what the pipeline is doing and what the steps involved. And that may be just in the way how you want to debug it and diagnose issues and problems, but it may be you also have compliance auditors that come in occasionally and go, what is your software delivery process? Can we understand how repeatable and how robust it is? And if you can kind of point to a single script and a single set of definitions, then life becomes a lot easier. So what was workflow until today in Jenkins? Typically it involved job chaining, so upstream and downstream triggers. Sometimes people have been using the build flow plugin. So build flow was written in GroovyScript and it defines a chain of jobs, but it wasn't particularly graphical. Then other people have been using the build pipeline. A lot of people have been using that to visualize what's happening. And some people have even been using the build delivery pipeline. But essentially, workflow up until today had many atomic jobs. It was painful when complex logic was needed, such as retries. It was difficult to pass parameters around between all of those jobs. And it was often difficult to comprehend what was happening end to end unless you started chasing through every single job and every dependency. A special note about the build flow plugin, because this was a good source of inspiration for the new workflow plugin. It did have scriptability and extensibility. We heard that visualization was wanted, but we also heard a lot of demand for scriptability. The build flow plugin did not address configuration sprawl, as it continued to have many small jobs, and it was difficult to have a global view of the execution of the workflow. And it did not have the ability to survive a restart. So there were many good things about it, but we wanted to go further, and that plugin didn't really enable that. So the CloudBees engineers built the workflow engine, which is delivered as a plugin into Jenkins. So let's talk through this in a bit more detail. So I'm going to slightly simplify our workflow for the demonstration purposes. I'm going to take out production because I'm only running on a laptop. But in reality, it would be the same as deploying to staging, but to a different set of nodes. So just to recap, so that's what we're going to look for that we need. So all of those things that I talked about earlier. And I'm going to show you how we deliver all of those with the new workflow. So here's an example of our workflow syntax. I'm hoping that you can read that on the screens that you've got. But ostensibly, this is a Groovy-based DSL. And I'm going to go through this in more detail. So the key features of our workflow. The entire flow is one concise Groovy script. So you've got for loops, try finallys, fork joins, all the power that you get with a Groovy language. You can restart Jenkins while the flow is running. The main script is executing on the master, but all the work is being done by individual build nodes, by slaves. And so if you restart the master, it's got state persistence. The slaves can reconnect and it can carry on. You can allocate the parts of the workflow to different slave nodes, and you can also set up individual specific workspaces if you need some form of isolation. You can have as many as you want when you want. You can also use stages to throttle the concurrency of builds. So a classic example there might be that you are supporting an open source project and you've got lots of commits going in and you want those to be compiled very quickly and run some basic tests, so you run lots of those in parallel as they come in. But as you get down to sort of perhaps more complicated areas of testing that use more expensive environments, you may not have the resources to run multiple builds in parallel. And so you can set a throttle around that and say I only want one or two of those to be running at any time. We can also do human input and approval, which is fully integrated into the flow, and I'll show an example of that. And we leverage all the standard project concepts within Jenkins today, so source code management, push and pull of artifacts to the master, and support for a large number of plugins that already exist. So a quick word on the Groovy DSL versus a graphical workflow. There was a lot of debate internally and with prospect customers about how we do this, and the decision was taken that a lot of people out there are familiar with control flow logic, they're familiar with scripting languages, and it's easier to design the parallel retry for loops and things like that because everything's in Groovy to do that. People want to actually version control their scripts as well. They want to be able to check them in. They want to manage them alongside the application code, and that's easier to do with a scripting language than if you have to go through a UI and configure it. So many of you will know that if you're using BPM tools and things which underneath they store as XML, it's really hard to do things like differencing with XML, whereas obviously with the Groovy language that's easier and people can understand how the workflow has evolved over time. Having said all that, we do have visualization of the execution, which if you think about it, you probably make edits to your workflow n times, but the number of times you execute it is probably 100n. You're executing it many times a day. So what does the project setup look like? Well, workflow is defined as a single job. no longer do you have to have multiple jobs chained together. You can have one job, which is your entire pipeline from soup to nuts. So it's one single script, covers all steps. You can still use build triggers and parameters like you can with regular projects, and you can each workflow execution is just a regular Jenkins build displayed in the regular Jenkins views. So you should all be familiar. And then one of the extras that we have, which is actually one of the, there's two graphical visualizations. One is a tree-based one, and one is an actual pipeline execution visualized, and that's one of the CloudBees extensions. So I'm going to quickly whiz through some of the syntax, and then we'll dive into looking at the code and having a demo. So we've got non-sequential logic. That's implemented by things like the parallel block. And within that you can allocate nodes and run different steps on different servers, and you can run them in parallel. We also support loops, so you can do a for next loop. You can iterate around an array and carry out steps within that. And we've also got the ability to do retries. If you think about it, you may want your workflow to have a little bit of resilience, so it waits a certain amount of time, it tries a number of times for something to happen, but ultimately you don't want the workflows to just hang. So after a certain number of retries, you can kind of force the workflow to end if it's not been successful. You can interact with humans. So during the workflow execution, you can have the job pause and output a message, which can be whatever message or text that you want to put in it. And then you can also have a number of different styles of input. So it could just be a Boolean, yes, no. It could just be a continue. It could be to enter a password or some credentials, or it could be to choose from a number of options. As you can see there, there's a number of different input types that you can have. And the way that appears is when the job's executing, on the left-hand side, you'll get a pause for input menu item come up. And if you click on that, you'll then get the text displayed along with the input buttons that you've defined. And a point to note here as well is that input can also be gated behind access control. So you can choose the group or the user that is permitted to actually perform that input, which is great if you need to demonstrate things like separation of concerns and responsibilities for things like Sarbanes-Oxley. It becomes really powerful for that. And then the response and the question is also captured in the log. So if you're tailing the console log and you wonder why the job has stopped running, you can see at the end of the log there'll be a statement saying, pause, waiting for input, and then the input message and the continuation buttons effectively appear in the log, so you can continue from there. And then the response and everything is captured in the log, so you've got an audit. So stages. Stages are used to, as I said earlier, control concurrency, so it's a bit like a semaphore. So you can wrap a stage and say, I only want this to execute one job at a time, or you can make it unbounded. It's actually an ordinal number, so you can have whatever number of concurrency you want. And it also supports the visualization. So here we've got the tree list view, which is basically showing the execution path through the script. That's visible on all the running jobs, and of course the stage names come up in there to help you out. But then one of the additional ones that you've got is the stage visualization. This is a Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees capability. So if you're one of our Jenkins Enterprise customers, you'd have this as part of your subscription. This enables you to see across the horizontal, you've got the individual running jobs going across all the stages, and then you've got a list of all the jobs showing what the recent progress was. And as you can see there, if the job fails halfway across the pipeline, it goes red. What's interesting to note is there's one on there, the one in the middle is showing continuation. So this is using the restart capability, which I'll talk about on the next slide, but that particular workflow has been rerun from midway. The other thing to note with this is you've got access to all of the artifacts that are created during the build. So just like with normal Jenkins, you can access the artifacts like your war files or anything else that you produce. And as I said, you've got access to the restartability from checkpoints. So checkpoints, again, that's the Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees capability, and this enables you to restart your workflow from any number of checkpoints that you set up within the flow. What happens is internally the state of the workflow is saved, and you're able to basically restart it from one of these checkpoints. This is massively powerful if you've got a workflow that, say, spans a whole day to run because it's doing a whole load of complicated testing phases. If you just spent 4 hours doing a big regression test and then the workflow fails, you don't want to have to go back and rerun it. So if at the end of the regression test you set a checkpoint, no matter what happens after that, you can go back to the checkpoint and recontinue the workflow. And the other thing here is we wanted comprehensible scripts. So, Groovy is a powerful language, and we can define things like Groovy functions to wrap up common functionality that we want to abstract away from. So here you can see that I've created a couple of functions to both deploy my app and shut down the app, so the running containers. And the good thing to note here is I'm just using shell statements within the Groovy multi-line strings, so it's very readable and it's more efficient than if you call the shell command multiple times, but it makes for a very readable script. And because I've actually abstracted away my deployment into this function, if in the future I wanted to change the way I do my deployment, so instead of connecting to the servers one by one and running a shell script, I want to delegate to an Ansible or a Puppet or a chef recipe, I would just need to re-implement this function. And again, as long as I've got clean interfaces, the rest of the script should be agnostic to that. So let's have a look at the actual thing in action. So I'm hoping that you can see my Groovy script. So I'm just going to talk through some of the things that are actually on that. So at the top here I am using just normal Groovy syntax to define some variables. So here I'm just defining the Tomcat servers that I want to use. Just setting up some variables. You could be sourcing that data from anywhere else. If you've got a configuration management database, then you could just use Groovy to interrogate that and identify all the values that you need. Key thing here is I've got a stage here which I call build. So I'm just giving it a name. As I said earlier, you can put whatever stages you want into here. And then this is an interesting piece of syntax here, node. This is allocating a slave from a pool. So I've got a pool of Linux slaves here, and I want to run everything within this node block on one of my slaves. I managed to just make an edit to that by mistake. So we're using echo, which just records stuff in the console log. And then here you can see I'm basically doing a git checkout. Obviously we support Git, we support SVN, and we've got wrappers around the other SCMs as well. So we've got direct access to the typical Jenkins capabilities. Here I'm using a function, so I've abstracted away how to make sure Maven is installed, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And then I'm just running a number of shell targets here, shell steps, which are basically performing a Maven clean and package. And then I'm tarring up the source code that I've used into a tar file. And the reason I'm doing that is because in the next step I'm going to archive that back to the master. And obviously when you run a workflow, you can be running across multiple nodes. Each of your steps or groups of steps might get allocated a different slave to run on. And in this instance, I don't want to recheck out from the source code to run my Sonar analysis because I might pick up an update and it might not be the exact same version that I did my compile against. And rather than messing around with git commit hashes and passing those around, I've decided I'm just going to tar up my source that I checked out, and then I'm going to hand that on to the next stage of the workflow, lock stock, and not have to worry about going back to source code control. Here I'm actually publishing the JUnit results. So again, we've got the Surefire reports have been archived as part of the job, and they'll come out on the job page with the visualization that you normally have. Down here I'm running a checkpoint. So as I said earlier, you can put checkpoints wherever you want within your workflow, and that will enable you to save the state and be able to resume. And just to remind you, that's a CloudBees Enterprise Jenkins feature. Here I've got another stage, and in this particular one you can see that I'm setting the concurrency to 1. I only want the QA and performance testing to run one build at a time, so builds will still queue up behind this if there's multiple that are active. But then this is where it gets really powerful. In normal Jenkins jobs, they get allocated to a single node, and you do things sequentially. By using the parallel statement, I'm able to actually say I want to run my QA on a slave from this slave pool, and in parallel I want to run my performance tests on a node from this slave pool. Now obviously in my example I happen to be using the same slave pool, but I will actually allocate 2 nodes to run both of these stages, these sets of tasks. So here you can see that I'm running an unarchive command. So I'm retrieving the source tar that I created earlier. Again, I'm checking that Maven is installed on this particular node, and then I'm basically untarring it, and I'm running the sonar target from Maven to do my static analysis of the code. And then in parallel to that, on my performance test node that gets allocated, I'm going to retrieve the archived WAR file, and then I'm going to call a function to deploy it to my application server, and I'm just passing in the attributes or the variables for my particular application server instance I want to use, and then I'm going to run JMeter. And again, as you can see here, I'm using the reusable function to make sure that Maven is installed. And then right at the end, again, calling another function to just do a shutdown. So as you can see, it's a nice, clean, simple to understand script. Going down a bit further, we've now got another checkpoint, we've got another stage. Again, I'm now basically unarchiving again, and I'm now going to deploy to a different server, to a different environment, but as you can see, I'm reusing a very similar syntax. I'm just supplying some different variables to it, so it's nice and easy. Now we get a little bit more interesting. Here we've got our input. So when I get to staging, I'm going to ask the question, was your QA testing successful? Did it look all right? And if yes, then we're going to carry on. So here I've got the OK button, and this is what I want it to show. I want it to show this particular prompt, so you know exactly what to click. And the script at this point will pause, waiting for this input to be given. And then again, another deployment. So you kind of get the message here that it's a lot of it is reusable code definitions, and it becomes really simple. And I've just got another input message here, which is, okay, I can shut everything down, I'm finished. So let's have a look at some of the functions that I've got. So here's the reusable functions. So as I showed you earlier, here's the deploy function. Just takes some variables coming in, and then it's basically going to run a shell statement that will perform a number of functions against my Tomcat server to clean it up, copy across the new WAR file, and then here you can see that I've got the startup. Startup is here, and then I've got a retry where I'm waiting for the actual service to come up and my health tech JSP to respond. So I'm trying 5 times, and I've got a 5-second sleep in my shell script. And then over here I've got the shutdown, and again it's very similar. So the final thing to talk about here is looking at how we were ensuring that Maven was installed. So again, the workflow understands the concepts within Jenkins. So you have the tool installers, the regular Jenkins feature that will support installing something like Maven. I can actually ask using the step for a tool to make sure that Maven's installed and add it to my path as a very simple, simple piece of syntax. So I'm now going to switch to the UI, and I will show you the demo actually running. So hopefully you can all see my Jenkins screen. So here is an example of a workflow job. As you can see, it looks very similar to normal jobs, except for the fact that you've got this big visualization in the middle. So let me go and show you the configuration. So again, up the top, you've got the normal kind of job definition sections, things like how long you want to keep logs and keep build logs and artifacts. You can do things like parameterizing the build, you can configure authorization, and you've got the usual triggers. You can poll SCM, you can build on the cron, or you can build with external triggers. Then what you'll see is in the workflow, the script can either be cut and pasted into here, which is one way of doing it, or you can actually source it from a file within your project. So you can actually load a Groovy file from within the root of your source code, which has all of this within it. Or you can actually load it from source code. So you can point it to a specific repository and have the script just pulled in from there. we wouldn't recommend building huge, great complex workflows in this text input box. Just like we wouldn't recommend having loads of shell statements in here, we'd expect you to put it into a script file. And another thing to note is, well, okay, when you start, you'll get a blank screen. There will be no script in the workflow box. So you need to start typing all this text in. So what we've done is we've actually given you a snippet generator, and that enables you to basically pick what you want to do. So for instance, I want to allocate a node. This is my Linux node. And then I can generate the Groovy, and it will give me a snippet that I can then cut and paste into either my, my text editor or into that box and start to build up my workflow. And this self-discovers the compatible plugins that are installed in your Jenkins instance. So as more and more plugins become workflow enabled and you install those plugins into your environment, the steps will appear here, and you can just pick on them and then do your, enter your parameters and generate the Groovy, which is a really powerful feature. So just going back to the job, I'm going to trigger off an execution. So I'm going to click Build Now. I haven't got this monitoring the source because I'm actually wanting to make sure it works if I'm offline. And then what you'll see is the normal progression of a Jenkins build running. So if I click into that build, I can look at the console output. I've actually got all of the logs being consolidated from all of the slaves that I happen to be running on. They all come back as part of the job log, which is very useful. If I also look at this, I can see the running steps. So this is the tree view that I talked about earlier. So I can see exactly what's running and where it's running within the steps. Here I'm running the performance tests. Further up you can see I'm running the QA, and this is the stage names that I was talking about earlier. But more importantly, if you've got Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees, you get this visual view of the progression of your workflow. And the great thing about this is you've got the stages that you've defined across the top. You can even make this go full screen. So you can actually put this up onto build radiators in your team environment, and you can see what's happening. So across here you've got the average duration of the recent builds. Here you've got the duration of this particular build, and if they start running slow, they will actually go red. I talked earlier about the fact that you can pause for input. So this script has now paused to say, what do we reckon? Is it all good? Is it running? So here I'm going to go across to my application, and we can see that it's now running. I can do whatever tests I wanted to do, and then I can go back to here and I could go, it's time to move on. But I can also do that if I'm in the job. I see here I've got pause for input on the left-hand side. And again, I've got my prompt that comes up, and I can decide whether or not I'm going to continue or whether it's failed its tests. Interestingly enough, if I was tailing the logs, then at the bottom here I've also got the same prompt. So no matter which way I'm looking at it, I can see that this has been paused. So I'm now going to click OK, and what we can see now is this will continue its execution. So this will refresh in a second. And now it's going to prompt again because I'm now saying I'm finished and I want to shut down my servers. So I can click yes, and it will now continue and end. A couple of points to note here. If I'd got source code changes, they would be visible here as a small list. And if I wanted to access the artifacts that have been created, then I have those available to me as well. And then I talked about the retries. So I had 3 checkpoints in this script. Even now the script is finished, it's possible to actually go and rerun from a checkpoint. And I've got these little restart icons here, which enable me to do that at the various places where the script had a checkpoint. So I'm now going to kick off and I want to rerun the QA again, and that will now trigger a new instance running from that point. So again, just to reiterate, this stage view and the restartable checkpoints are not open source. They're features that you get with Jenkins Enterprise. And just to prove that it was actually talking to Sonar, I've got my list here. So the last build time was 1734. If I refresh that, 1842, yeah, that looks about the time. So again, it's just written and published the results to Sonar. So hopefully you can see this isn't just smoke and mirrors. It's really happening. And if I continue with my script here and let it shut down, you'll be able to see that Tomcat has actually stopped running. So that's now paused. I'm going to stop Tomcat. You can see that's now gone away. So to just recap, what I've done here is I've actually done my compile, my unit test. I've packaged up my application, and then in parallel I've done my Sonar static code analysis and my performance tests, and then I've deployed to QA and deployed to staging Tomcat servers. So I'm just going to switch back to the PowerPoint. So I'm just going to recap on some of the key syntax. So as you can see here, we've got the stage item, so creating a new stage. Node allocates a node, that's one of your slaves from a slave pool. WS allocates a workspace. Parallel enables you to execute sub-workflows in parallel, so a number of steps can be run in parallel. And again, you can allocate those to different nodes. You've got retry, so you can retry up to n times. We've got catch error, so you can try something and continue if you so wish. We've got input for human input, and load, which is one I haven't shown you, but that's the one that enables you to load other Groovy source files into the workflow script. And that's a good way of loading it from your project root. Step is a general build step. You saw me use the shell step. There's also an equivalent for Windows, which is the batch one. And there's also a wait until, which allows you to wait for a condition to become true. So you could use that instead of retry if you wanted to. Archive enables you to push artifacts up to the master, so you can share those across other nodes within the workflow. And unarchive does the inverse and pulls them down. Echo just prints to the log. Directory enables you to change the working directory. And you can also read and write to files within the workspace if you needed to do something specific, like update configuration files before running some process. We've got various SCM commands, so we've got Git, we've got SVN, and we've got a general SCM step. Tool we talked about, so you can install things like the version of Java, the version of Maven, or any other compatible tools. And you can even wrap workflows around existing Jenkins jobs with the build task. So you can basically slowly migrate a number of jobs into a workflow by wrapping them to start with until you migrate them purely into workflow. And then finally we've got checkpoint, which was the keyword which gives you the restartability. And just to restate, that's a Jenkins Enterprise feature. So where are we going in the future with this? I mean, workflow is new. It came out in November, December last year, and we're actively building upon it to provide richer support for continuous delivery, continuous deployment. Those of you who are keen eye will have noticed that we've already got up to 1.4 of the workflow plugin. 1.2 came out in January, which had the load script from SCM capability, and it had a couple of new steps, wait until, error, and email. 1.3 came out at the beginning of March, had improvements to the build step, such as wait and parameters, and had a new sleep step. And in March 16th, we actually had Workflow 1.4 came out. That implemented a great feature, which is to enable you to fail fast in a parallel step. If one of your parallel activities fails, you might decide there's no point in continuing with the other one. You want to kill the job and free up all of the resources. And there are a number of other build step enhancements and enhancements to the snippet generator and various bug fixes and things. 1.5 is coming soon. That will have support for the 1596 LTS release in it. So possible futures, as always, crystal balls and roadmaps. This is kind of where we want to go, but the date's not specific yet. We want to have more plugin interoperability. A number of the plugins have been modified to use the new code interfaces and are fully supported directly within Workflow. If you want to know where we are with some of the other plugins, there's a compatibility.md file in the source which lists all of the plugins that we are working on or working with the maintainers on to support workflow. We want to be able to support multi-branch projects in a richer way with better SCM integration. We also want more advanced SCM integration and being able to support getting source from multiple repositories. Any repository that's referenced by a workflow job can be monitored and polled for updates and cause the workflow to run, but we want to improve on that further. There's also an idea that we'll do in-IDE editing support with auto-completion and things like that. And even though we've got a fairly short syntax, there are people that would like us to kind of simplify it even further and kind of provide better defaults and shorter step names. So that was all the stuff that's likely to be in open source. And obviously those of you that have got a Jenkins Enterprise subscription from CloudBees, we are looking to perhaps provide richer or more visualizations. We really want to help our customers understand how they've got to what's running in production, where it's come from, what steps it's been through, how it ties back to the source. We want to support validated merge, because although you can do that at the moment in the normal job types, we want to make sure that can be supported in workflow. And we also want to support those customers that are doing blue-green style deployments, so leg A, leg B with full rollback, and make that a first-class capability within workflow. You could do it today by creating your own reusable functions, but we want to try and make that even easier. Obviously, a number of customers have got freestyle projects or build flow projects, and we're looking to see if we can provide some form of migration capability to migrate those across to workflow without having to type it all in by hand. And one of the things that we want to do off the bat was actually integrate workflow with the Jenkins Enterprise templates capability. And that was actually delivered in one of the earlier releases. So you can now basically templatize a workflow and then just spin up new instances of it just by supplying a few attributes that are different across your projects. And that's great if you're running things like microservices and you've got many projects that are all going through the same life cycle and doing exactly the same thing. And the only thing that's fundamentally changing is the source code repository, the application name, and the target host names. You could templatize a workflow and just keep reusing it. So for those of you that have been kind of looking at this and going, how do I get to the detail and how do I try it? By all means, check out the workflow script that I was running. That's available on the top link there as a GitHub project. And if you want to have the version of the pet clinic that was running, I think I made a couple of small tweaks to it to get it to run. Mainly to run under headless mode for testing and stuff. You can grab the modified version from the second link. And I talked earlier about having a number of plugins that were being updated, and they're available in that compatibility.md file. There's more workflow resources around. There's a great tutorial, which the link's there for you. And if you've got Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees, then our workflow functionality is fully documented within our user guides. And then watch this space because there will be more and more webinars on how to leverage workflow. And if you want further information on CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise, please feel free to contact us. The information's on there. And if you're looking to ramp up and resource up your project, feel free to contact Adele at eSynergy Solutions. So that's all from the presentation. I now kind of open the floor up to any further questions and answers. So I'm going to have a quick look at what we've got and maybe recap some of them. What I will say is we're running a bit short of time, so a lot of the questions have been answered already by Jesse, and we will put these up on the website with the link to the recordings and the presentation. So I'm just looking at this. We've actually had a ton of questions that have come in, and Jesse has been very rapidly working through a lot of them. I think there's too many for us to go over here. So I think what the best course of action is if we wrap up the live part of the webinar, but I think we'll leave the questions and answers session up for a a period of time for you to submit any further questions, and then we'll make sure we post all of those onto the website. So thank you all very much for listening, and hopefully we will see you at an event or an exhibition or a conference soon. We can catch up more. Thank you. Bye-bye.